as soon as I became an adult and realized how rare that is, and how, um, around the world, but particularly here in the United States, a lot of people really don't get to see very much.
All right, everybody. He's performed with the likes of Phantogram, Cold War Kids, Jungle, James Blake. You've heard his music on HBO, Fox, NBC, ESPN. Happy to call him a friend of mine and the Eiffels. We've got Mobley here today. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, dude. So I'm glad we get to talk. It's Friday. It's a little looser. Also, congratulations are in order. I know you're a dad now, so congrats, man.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'm doing big boy things myself here, as you can see. That happened a couple weeks ago. For those listeners, I just pointed to my ring finger, which has some gold on it now.
That's good news, man.
Yeah, so we're growing up, man. But tell me a little bit about because you've been called a perennial new kid as far as how you grew up. So why was that, and how was that?
Yeah, my dad was in the military, and so every 2 or 3 years I was moving to a new school and a new city, and kind of having to figure out what the social rules are wherever I was going to be. And I think that being a part of how I was raised, and the kind of adaptability that you have to make that work, has really been a big part of my artistic life as well, in terms of kind of having an open ear to a lot of things, and bringing in a whole lot of different influences, because my life has just been, one thing after another, in terms of like the cultural context I was in, whether the linguistic context I was in, moving to different countries overseas. And so I feel a real openness, and a real kind of an adventurous spirit when it comes to the things that go into my sound.
Yeah, that's cool that you say that it gave you an adventurous spirit, because I've been thinking about lately how I just like doing new things. You know what I mean? Like there can be things that I love, but if it's something's just that I've never done something before, it just kind of excites me. So did you kind of see the silver lining as a kid? Like, oh, this is going to be a new school, or was it a little bit like, I got to do this again?
Uh, I probably neither, honestly. Like, I just didn't know anything else.
Right.
It just was the way the world was for me. Um,
Right.
but as soon as I became an adult and realized how rare that is, and how, um, around the world, but particularly here in the United States, a lot of people really don't get to see very much, and their concept of what the world is very constrained by the people and things around them. I really definitely developed a big appreciation for it. I I don't I don't. It's hard to imagine how different I would be as a person without those experiences.
Yeah. Did a lot of the places you would, because you moved like into, like, you lived in Texas. I think you said you lived in California for a little while. You lived in overseas, like you said. Did you find that as far as in high school that a lot of those places matched the stereotypes of those areas? Like, for example, my nephew just moved to Nashville, and I was asked, and he's in middle school now, and he's grown up in California. So I asked him, I was like, how is it? How do you like it? And he really likes it. But I was like, what are some of the differences? And he was like, well, a lot of the kids listen to country music. I don't really listen to country. And so like, that's kind of like a stereotype that's true, I guess. Did you find any of those stereotypes to be true?
Um, I, I guess in broad ways, yes, but you know, anytime you get to know a place, um, all sorts of complexity emerges for you. Like you see a place from far away and it's like, well, it seems like this is the way that is. And then you get there and it's like, well, it is that way, but I didn't realize that this is why, and that affects these three other things, which makes it feel different than I would have thought it felt. So yeah, I would say there were definitely broadly things that were true about those places. In high school, in particular, I was in Texas, in San Antonio, Texas, and then in North Carolina, and those places were probably different in the ways you would expect them to be different from each other, but also really alike in a lot of ways. I mean, somehow, um, somehow, even even before, you know, the internet was as big as it is now and social media was as big as it is now, um, lots of trends permeated both places, and you know, everybody was drawing the S on their
Yeah.
that,
Yes,
that
that was
stuff.
happening at my school. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how somehow those things would just, like you said, without the internet, just be everywhere. You know.
Yeah.
And I think, and I, whenever I talk about pre-internet, I talk about how it's interesting because I think all the internet has done has sped up trends, you know? So it's like the 90s was a whole decade of baggy pants. And now it's like, you know, baggy pants will be back in for like a year and then, and then it'll be something else. You know what I mean? So it's just, I find like social media and the internet has just like we're speeding up, you know.
Yeah.
I've thought about that before too. I think just social media too, just you know, if you get on Twitter and just, you know, all the discussions about social issues and everything, I sometimes think about it in terms of if you were just like looking at the human species under a microscope, and it would be like we're slowly moving, and now there's like this hyper kind of hyper critique and also hyper correction that's going on, you know, and it's just gonna, I don't know, go faster and faster maybe. You know, so
We'll see.
yeah. So the way that I met you was Lee Marciniak of the Eiffels played drums with you on a couple dates, I think, at a couple festivals, and then so we wound up meeting and playing a couple shows. And we played, I think, at the Bootleg Theater in Los Angeles. I ended up seeing you at the Satellite and the Resident, and you came out to see the Eiffels at a Loft Hotel when we were over in Texas, playing with the X Ambassadors. And so one thing I noticed is watching you is you put on a great live show, and I think you're known for that because you're not only a musician, you're a producer, but you're a visual artist and someone who really knows how to leverage technology, I think, to achieve your vision. Tell us a little bit about how you bring all those together and where you think that comes from.
Yeah. I I'm not entirely sure where it comes from. I've always been really interested in technology and in visual art. I when I was a kid, I really wanted to be an animator, and actually ended up studying film and animation in school, but was was really taken by songwriting and making records, and ended up being what I did. But I still have a really deep love for visual arts and for filmmaking. Um, and I also kind of have a background in stage acting, stage performance, and so
Mm,
I have a real love for the theatrical.
yeah.
And so I think the genesis of it, I guess, would be, you know, my very first tour. Um, I went out and I'd gotten rid of my apartment. I got in a van with my band and we went out, and I'm kind of a shy person when I'm not on stage. And so my plan was just to be this like kind of mysterious, aloof front man,
Uh-huh.
sing the songs and then kind of turn inward during the show.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh-huh.
and we were out like playing dive bars on a completely independently booked tour, and I tried that for like 2 nights, and it just was not working at all.
Not audience wasn't feeling it. It wasn't connecting.
No, no. And I was just like, well, I've kind of like put everything on this, so like I need them to pay attention. I need
Yeah.
their attention. So um, the next night I came out, tried something completely different. It was really super outgoing, borderline aggressive. Um,
Uh-huh.
with the way that I tried to work the room, and really really leaned into the theatrical elements of what we were doing, and it was just, you know, day and night in terms of the way that people reacted. And so I guess from that time, everything else is kind of built on that idea of really taking control of a space, and you know, the I think when the audience comes in, they're really depending on you to help them understand how they're supposed to respond to your work. And so, you know, things like lights, things like video, excuse me, interactive elements, those all really help you shape a space, especially light. You know, when you can make it dark and then shine a light in a particular space, it was just human nature. Everyone will look where the light is, and
Yeah.
looks where the light isn't. Um, and so, you know, taking bits of wisdom and sagecraft from like magicians and illusionists and stuff, and theater, and trying to turn that all into kind of a theory of how to work a room, and then using technology, like you said, to control the lighting and the videos, and make everything kind of run together, has been like almost like a whole second career alongside, you know, making
Yeah.
music and everything. But it's really fulfilling to get to kind of have that control over every single aspect of what's happening on stage. um, and now it's hard to imagine, you know, uh, doing a tour without that.
Yeah. I mean, to for those who haven't seen you, just so they can visualize it, you are a one-man production on stage. You have a huge, projection that's on during the show that's synced up with your music. So it's, different musical elements are lining up with what's on the screen. You've got lights. You're going from the microphone to your guitar to getting off the guitar, jumping on the drum kit, doing the drum kit. So you're playing all these different elements. And I love that you are looking at it from the scope of, oh, what can I take from illusionists and magicians and stagecraft and my drama days and mixing it with and I love that you realized that too, because that you had to kind of up the ante with your energy, because as they say in drama or Broadway, it's like Broadway, you're supposed to do huge movements because people, so the people in the back can see you. Whereas on TV or on movies, they say you're supposed to do a lot like smaller movements because you're on a big screen and everyone can see. So the smallest movement can be interpreted. On television, maybe like a little bit bigger. And you are definitely the more of the stage style movement as far as what I've seen, because you would never guess that you're an introvert or shy person when you're watching you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned to me before that you're a coder, and so that probably helped you immensely, because I know when I'm trying to figure out stuff, just how to sync certain applications with live shows, it's always a pain. I'm always having to relearn things, but since that's kind of you're kind of a native with that stuff. I mean, you can tell because there's a lot of elements that have to be synced up for what you do.
Yeah. Before I was doing music full time, I worked as a developer, and So I've been coding, I guess, since I was in high school, and that's really opened up. That was probably the biggest, the biggest element in opening up my ability to kind of think broadly on the way this stuff works. Because when I first started doing this stuff, there were a lot fewer solutions for some of the things that I was imagining. So I'm, from years ago, I've been writing my own code, and writing my own programs to run some of this stuff. So yeah, it's been a massive part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's something that a lot of musicians who aren't, code savvy would never even dream of. So you'll have to release the Moby suite of live production tools at some point.
Yeah, eventually.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about the new album, because it's awesome, and the title "Young and Dying in the Occident Supreme." What does that mean? I think a lot of people have heard the word Occident, but for example, right in my hood, I have Occidental College, but I never really think about what it means. So, what does Occident mean, and what's that title mean?
Yeah, so Occident just means West, and the title of the record comes from a poem that I wrote. That is the thing that starts out the record. A friend of mine who is an immigrant from Mexico read it for me, read it really beautifully, and that's what starts the record. And the idea came from, I mean, the idea for the entire record actually came from a trip I took. Uh, I was on tour in Australia and decided to kind of extend the trip and turn it into a little vacation because I hadn't had any time off for a while. So we went over to Thailand, and the plan was to take time off, but ultimately I ended up getting really inspired and doing a lot of writing over there. I think mostly because I was kind of really limited to being an observer of what was going on because I couldn't speak the language, didn't have any friends over there. So I was just kind of watching and taking things in and thinking. And the big story in the news at the time was the family separations at the border, which had been really weighing really heavily on my mind, especially living where I do. It's, a couple hours away from where I live. Um,
Yeah.
and it's really distressing, especially now. I wasn't a father at the time, but now as a father, it's just, I can't imagine somebody trying to take my kid away from me.
No, it's like
And
primal.
yeah, yeah. And they're the politics around that stuff, especially in a place like Texas, are really frustrating. So people will kind of hem and haw and try to act like there are two sides to the issue. But there was something really clarifying and refreshing about traveling abroad during that time and hearing in these other countries on the news, it would just be like, the United States is committing human rights abuses at its southern border, which is like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. There's not another way to say it.
You were seeing that in like paper headlines and stuff like that over there.
Or like international newscasts that were in English.
Mm. Mm.
They they were just pretty bluntly just calling it what it was, violations of international law. And and I think something about that clarity was inspiring. And so the line from the poem is how good it is to be young and dying in the Occident Supreme. And that was just kind of a reflection on, living in the United States. You have this idea of American exceptionalism, that this is just the best country in the history of the world, and Western culture is the greatest culture in the history of the world, and that's why we have the most money, and that's why we win all the wars, and blah 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 blah. And you know, all that notwithstanding, you see just rampant poverty and homelessness and suffering on just really difficult to imagine scales. And this was before COVID. It's even worse now, obviously.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of a tongue in cheek. It started as just kind of a tongue in cheek jab at like, this is the greatest place on earth, and yet, you know, you can't.
Young and dying.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got all these young people leaving Earth way before their time because of horrible systems that don't care about them. And so the record, as it grew, just kind of it ended up being an exploration of that idea and an exploration of all the ways in which um, this country is really trapped by a lot of bad old ways of thinking. And the record is really about urging us to discard those things and look at things in a newer and better way, and in the hope that that leads us to a fairer and more peaceful world.
Yeah, I love that you detoured from Australia to go to Thailand, and I love that you found. I think you told me that you just found like you saw like a knockoff Fender Strat or something in Bangkok or something like that, and that's what you were using to kind of throw some of these ideas together.
Yeah. The first day I was there in Bangkok, I saw a knockoff Telecaster in the window of this music shop, and I hadn't brought any of my gear with me or anything because I wasn't planning on doing any
Was
work.
it just like so cheap? How cheap was it?
Like, man, it couldn't have been more than $50.
That's awesome. Yeah.
And so I picked it up and I was like, okay, I'll just noodle on this.
Did
And
it sound okay? Was it did it play okay?
it's on the record. Like half
Oh, really?
I tracked most of the guitar for the record, like on the coffee table of this apartment on an island south of the mainland
It's
of
so
Thailand.
awesome.
And so yeah, it sounded great.
I think I told you, but my wife and I did a trip to Thailand a few years back, and we still like to this day want to go back, even though there's places that we haven't been and we want to go. I think it's one of our favorite trips, if not our favorite trip. Like it was just so cool, and I just the prices there. I mean, we part of the trip was in Koh Phi Phi, which was like this island south of Thailand and part of Thailand, but south of the mainland. And we were just on the beach. There's like these sleepy cats just all around us, eating the best Thai food of our life, having a couple Chang beers, and it was like $5 for the both of us. You know what I mean? It's just like, wow. And we were literally just running into people at hostels who were like, yeah, I stopped here on my trip, and now I just work at the hostel and I live here. I just decided not to leave, and it's like, wow, I could see how that would happen because it's awesome there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So you go to Thailand, you get supremely inspired to write this album about the Occident Supreme, and you come back with these ideas for these great songs. And I gotta say, James Crow, Nobody's Favorite, Mate, great songs and great music videos. It's since you and I have known each other for a while, it's really cool when you know an artist or whatever the craft is, and you just see them over the years getting better and better. It's just love seeing people continue to develop and grow and sharpen their skills. So congrats on a great body of work and a great and all three of those music videos for this project were awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate that a lot.
Do you have fun shooting those? I like the camera work with Mate. For those who haven't seen it, there's kind of like this rotating effect where you're on a bed and it looks like the camera's going in front of you and then all the way around, and there's I feel like it's an illusion, but it looks like the camera is going like under the bed and then coming back out under, and then the scene changes every time it comes back from under the bed, and it seems like once you set it up that maybe it was a simple setup, but then just like a very cool visual effect. Is that true, or was that hard to set up?
It was really hard to set up.
Okay. Okay. Well, it looks really cool, so it was worth it. But I was wondering if there was some fancy trickery going on that maybe you could have figured out to make it look that way without. So we're using a crane or something that actually was like detailed.
Yeah, so we were using a cinema robot to have the arc be exactly the same every time, and time everything out. It was a lot of math to, to work out the timing for the song. I when I kind of keep a stack of ideas for music videos, and then every time I have a song that needs a music video, I open this file and I'm like, well, does anything in here work? And I have a friend and a collaborator who is a cinema robot salesman, and they are always looking for they're always looking for kind of example portfolio work. And
Mm-hmm.
so we did a little trade. I did a little work for them, and then we got this robot for a day. And so we probably
Awesome.
spent I don't know 16, 18 hours shooting that day. But yeah, so the concept is that there's this bed floating in space, and I'm on one side of the bed, um, like on the top of the bed, and then on the underside of the bed is my love interest, and we're conducting this socially distant romance. I was trying to come up with an idea that I could shoot without putting anybody in danger, and
Right.
anybody needing to be on screen touching at the same time or anything like that. And so, yeah, the basically we had a bed set up, and then the camera goes over and around like this, and so we shot all of hers, and then we shot all of mine, and then I went in and cut them together so that it looks like it's a constant spin. And then there's that one establishing shot where you see like the bed rotating in space that kind of sells the illusion. But yeah, it was really fun to get to do, and it's always really fulfilling as an artist when you have a plan and it kind of works out, because so much of
Yeah.
like artists just like fumbling, and it's like, oh, this is cool, like I'll just keep going with this. But sometimes you have to have a plan, and you never quite know how it's going to come out until you do it. But that one came out great.
Yeah. Uh, like you said, that's one of those things where you have to be, otherwise it's gonna look funky or sloppy. So you guys did a great job with that. It looks really cool. You guys created a really cool visual there. um I wanted to say too, your promotion of the album, at least so far with your virtual tour, was just genius, because you did a tour earlier this year, and I think it just speaks to your resourcefulness. And I mentioned this to you before, but you know, you basically, if COVID was a windstorm, you built a windmill, or used the wind for your sails. You know what I mean? And some people do that. Some people thrive. Like you were able to capitalize on the fact that all these, like these stadiums or these hotel rooftops were empty because no one was there, so you were able to just put yourself there and be like, I'm going to put on a performance here and we'll record it, and this will be my virtual tour date for this particular city. And you created these really cool videos, so props to you on your resourcefulness, man. I thought it was genius.
Thank you, I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we just got really fortunate. It was like an idea that someone on the team kind of mentioned offhand, and then I was like, well, what could I do with that? And then we just we asked the question, can we come shoot here? And they're like, yeah, we would love for someone to use this space.
Yeah.
Here for months. uh,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it came out really amazing.
Yeah. And thanks for asking the Eiffels to be a part of it, joining you for the virtual show with the Troubadour. Gave us an excuse to record some stuff in the middle of the live show drought. So that was fun for us.
Yeah, yeah, you guys killed it. It was a really I expected it to be fun, but it was a surprisingly heartwarming experience. Seeing it was just so clear that so many of us really were craving an outlet like that, and
Yeah.
so many people put so much of themselves into their performances for that tour, and then the conversations that we got to have in like the little virtual green room thing that we did on
Yeah.
Instagram was really fun.
Yeah, we so Lee, he's since moved to Texas. Still keep in touch, talk all the time, but he lives in Texas. So we had to get a friend of ours to drum for that performance, and then another friend of mine, Jordan, and Ryan, they played with us. But it was just like, we were like, this is therapy right now, just playing live. Playing live with yourself was the closest that we were getting to live music. I mean, because it was live music, we just happened to be the ones playing it. But yeah, so we were saying how therapeutic it was, and it was funny because we were at our rehearsal room, and we were rehearsing, and the owner, or the friend of the owner, came banging on the door with one of our new songs, which has since been released. Collide just released, and we opened the door up, and he was just like, "That's the song." And he's like, "Can I just like stand out here and listen?" And so we let him, and he was just like rocking out to it. And we're like, "Wow, that was the only audience we've had. That one guy was the only audience for like a year or whatever, but it was awesome." It's just like, it's crazy how starved we are for that sort of thing.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm curious if you're the same way. But for me, I don't, like I said, I'm kind of an introvert, so I don't really usually get out that much for leisure. Like I get
Mm-hmm.
out of work. Um,
Right.
but
But you get out a lot though. You
yeah.
tour a lot, so.
But I this has been a revelation in terms of like what a stabilizer and kind of sanity check-in playing live is, especially, for me. I make my music. I'm sitting in the room where I make my music, and I make it alone. And so, shows are really the only time that I get to have anything like a conversation with another human being. Like, is this any good?
Yeah.
Um, is that kind of the experience you guys have been having?
Totally. And for me, I mostly work from home, like you, and so, but opposite to you, I like socializing, but it's like I don't have like a an everyday social scenario like a lot of people do. You know what I mean? So similar to you, it's from going to shows, which that's probably the thing that gets me out of the house the most, is either playing shows or going to shows. That's like my favorite thing to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've said this to a few artists that I've interviewed too, is I think COVID has shown me something. I think a lot of times we think of the arts or music as supplemental, but I think it's totally necessary. Like, it's one of the things I miss the most, if not the thing I miss the most. I mean, of course, we all got to eat, we all got to drink, we all got to sleep. There's those things. We love a roof over our heads. So those things, of course, are essential. But music, what's life if it ain't worth living? You know what I mean? And music
I mean,
makes life worth living.
you imagine the last year and a half, but then you take away all the books, all of the TV shows, all the movies, all the songs.
Yeah.
What would have happened?
That's what I like. I've talked about this with my wife. It's like, without all those shows to stream and movies, we would have been going insane. I mean, people already were going insane, you know what I mean? But that helped us stay sane, and at least, helped us to relax a little bit while, we were waiting for this to all blow over,
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So so anyways, props to that. Props to your tour. And thanks for having us on there. One thing I gotta say that I admire about you, Mobley, is I feel like you do things on your own terms, because I know you basically became a solo artist out of necessity. You had a band, you were playing with some people, and then one person, I think, left, and then another person couldn't do the tour, and you're like, well, the show must go on, so I'm gonna figure out how to make this work. So I love that you pull the trigger and you make the decision regardless of the circumstance. You seem like you create your circumstance rather than being bending to circumstance. So I think that's really cool. Where do you think that has anything to do with you moving from town to town and just having to make it work, and and just being like, well, I got to figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a part of it. I think there are probably three things that contribute to me having that disposition. Um, Moving around and just kind of having to get used to adapting to circumstances is a big one. Um, Growing up poor is another one.
That'll do it. Yeah.
You just have to figure out a way to make it work. You got to figure out a way to stretch that dollar
Yeah.
and
Instead of buying a robot camera, you got to find a friend with a robot camera. Right.
exactly. And then I think the third one is my parents were just really good about encouraging us. I'm the oldest of four brothers, and they were really good about encouraging us to pursue things that we were interested in. And um, for about half of my schooling growing up, I was homeschooled, and so I really developed self-education as a skill, uh,
Yeah.
and so I think those three things combined to kind of give me an irrational confidence that I could figure it out if I needed to, and it's served me pretty well so far.
Yeah, it has. I was about to say it seems to be working, so that's awesome. Well, congrats, my friend. I know you got a new tour, I will help share the news for you. You're going to be touring with Louis Del Mar, so that's exciting. Speaking of being starved to play live, how's that feel, and how's that going to be?
Yeah, I don't I it hasn't quite hit me yet. It's in September, and we're sitting here in June now. um I'm excited about it. It's going to be kind of a change. My touring partner, my wife, who was my tour manager and my sound engineer, is on maternity leave now with our new baby. So I'm having to find somebody new to go on the road with. So it's gonna be kind of be like being in a band again. When the past few years of touring have basically just been kind of um,
Yeah, someone you know, or
yeah,
someone you're intimate with. Now you got to compromise a little bit more, or got to be with someone who you're a little less familiar with.
yeah, exactly.
Well, if anybody out there who wants to be Mobley's new manager, if you are competent and a hard worker, maybe hit him up.
Absolutely, hit me on Instagram.
Shoot him a DM. Well, that cool, man. So thanks again for doing this. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Always a pleasure to hang and talk. I'm glad we get to have these extended conversations instead of the short, conversations we have at shows. So it was cool to sit down with you and get to talk to you. We like to end the interview by asking, if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
My one piece of advice for aspiring artists would be, um, I think a lot of people try to give you advice about how to set up your career, how to achieve some particular goal. Um, but I don't think a lot of ink is devoted to, or a lot of time is devoted to, the question of what your art is conveying. And ultimately, art is an expressive form. So, it needs some sort of expressive content. And, and I know for me, I probably spent years working on my craft before really spending very much thought at all about what I actually wanted to say to the world. um, and especially as a kind of shy person in my ordinary life, when I get up on stage I feel very cognizant of the fact that everybody else is kind of required to shut up and listen to what I have to say, listen to what I have to sing. And so I think as artists, we have a responsibility to really devote thought to what we're saying and what we're putting out in the world and what we're conveying, because you know like we were talking about earlier in this conversation, art is really important, and art really shapes people's minds and their lives. And so I would say, really figuring out what it is you're about, as a person, and what you want to say in your art, and the things that you want to help bring out into the world with your art. I think if you can really figure that out, it'll make your career, it'll make your work so much more fulfilling than it is if it's just chasing, I don't know, some fleeting thing like, oh, I want more streams, I want to be at the show. Like,
right.
really focusing on that substance and then letting out everything else flow from that, I think is just a much more healthy way to make art.
I think that's really good substantive advice. Yeah, great advice. You know, a lot of times, and it's true also, a lot of times we get you just got to do it, or try your best, or don't give up. And those are all true. You know, cliches are cliches because so many people have said them, probably because they're true. But that's great advice, because I think that will just strengthen your resolve to keep making it as well. Because like you said, if you're doing it because of that, then who cares about the other stuff? The other stuff is just bonus, you know?